there, this is Ross Izard, and this is the Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast, where we talk about fly fishing in more interesting places. So this is our first ever podcast. It's actually the first podcast that I have ever recorded on anything at all. I've been on the radio a couple times. I've been on TV a couple times about other stuff that it's nowhere near as interesting as fishing. But I wanted to start a podcast, and I wanted to start a podcast specifically geared toward fly anglers who are kind of tired of standing shoulder to shoulder in the same old tail waters, catching the same fish that your buddy caught last week and that your dad caught 3 years ago and that your grandpa caught 10 years ago in the same hole, in the same water, with slots and locations that everybody knows. They have their own names. There are whole books written about them in a lot of cases. And that's fine. Look, if that's the way that you like to fish and that's the way that you like to engage with the sport and get outside, that's cool. No hate on my end. That's not how I am. I started fishing in those environments. I'm grateful for what they taught me, but as I have developed as an angler, I have found myself increasingly drawn to more wild places, right? So high alpine lakes at 12,000 feet, small streams and creeks and tributaries that require hiking for miles and miles in the mountains to reach. Places that I'm probably not the first guy to be there, but I'm definitely one of the only people to go there in any single 1 year period. Remote places where we're catching these beautiful wild fish who are off in nature doing exactly what they're supposed to do in the wilderness, in a wild ecosystem, in a place where you are unlikely to see anybody else. You're not going to see another truck in the lot. You're not going to see another guy standing in your favorite spot in the river. You are likely to be out there alone or with your friends who happen to go with you. That's the kind of fishing that I like to do. And I have found that the longer that I fly fish, the less it's about the fish and the more it's about the places that I catch the fish, right? So I love trout. I appreciate trout, and I respect them in a lot of ways as an animal and as the quarry that we're chasing with the fly rod. But man, there is nothing better than the places that you catch trout. So these serene lakes up on the top of mountains where they're cold and windy and desolate, but they're home to these amazing, gorgeous fish. Or the babbling mountain brooks that are 3 feet wide, running through a dark pine forest, babbling across rocks that have been there for 15 millennia. These places are special, and they speak to me. They speak to my heart. And so as I have grown up as an angler, I have really moved away from those crowded spaces, which get more crowded every year. And I have started to get into the adventure of fly fishing, the next interesting place that I can go to where I can catch trout on a fly rod. And that's really what this podcast is about. If you want to just go learn about fly fishing, you can do that in a lot of places. I can probably teach you some stuff, but let's be real. There are other guys who know just as much, probably more than I do about the fishing side of it. And you can go learn from them. But if you're the kind of person that really wants to get off into the bush and you understand that doing that requires this sort of broad knowledge of all these different sports and activities that come together. If this is a Venn diagram, you've got fly fishing in the middle, but then you've got hiking and hiking safety, and you have weather and weather safety, and you have survival skills and wilderness medical skills, and you have gear and equipment and all of the stuff that you have to think about to go out into the backcountry and be successful and be safe and come back at the end of that trip with some really cool pictures and with some awesome stories that you get to share with your friends and your family, rather than becoming a headline on the news somewhere of a guy who disappeared in the woods or fell off a cliff or whatever might have happened to you. Then this is the podcast for you. So we're not going to talk about just the standard fishing stuff. We are going to get into fly fishing. We will certainly talk about topics like how you will catch a fish or how you could catch a fish in a high alpine lake. What makes that different? How do the insects look different at those elevations? We'll talk about what it means to fish these teeny tiny mountain streams for brook trout. We are going to talk about fishing because that's why we're out there, right? But we also recognize that sometimes the fish are kind of an excuse, and we might also be interested in talking about hiking or rock scrambling or a million other things related to getting into the backcountry and doing these things. And so this podcast is really dedicated to building a better understanding among backcountry anglers about how to do this, about why you might want to do this, and then really about how to do it in the most efficient, safe way possible so that you can enjoy your time and have fun out there and build memories that'll be with you for the rest of your life. So for these first couple episodes, you'll just be listening to me talk. I've got a lot to say about how I got into this. And even though somebody, well, really anybody might not care about my specific story, I suspect that it'll resonate with a lot of folks, particularly as fly fishing gets more popular and more people get involved in it, more and more people try it out. I think there are going to be a lot of folks who are following the same trajectory that I did. They may be further along. They might be not quite there yet, but they're on the same path. And I think that being able to talk a little bit about how this particular developmental branch, so if you're an early fly fisher, why might you want to develop yourself into being a primarily backcountry fly fisher, and what does that mean? So we're going to talk a little bit about my journey, about how we got here, about the way that fly fishing speaks to me and speaks to my soul, the things that it does for me, and why I get the most on a whole lot of different levels, spiritually, emotionally, and physically, out of being way out in the wilderness, doing my thing in remote places where I'm probably not going to run into anybody else. We're going to talk about that. Once we've talked about that, we're going to start talking about the kinds of places that count as backcountry, right? So when we say that, what do we mean? It's important to have a good definition. Are we talking about walking half a mile down a trail from a parking lot with 40 other cars in it? Or are we talking off trail for 20 miles to a lake that might not even have a name on the map? Or is it something in between? We're going to talk a little bit about what that means, and then we're going to talk about what that means for you as an angler, as far as preparation goes, as far as planning goes, and as far as what this might look like for you in practice. And then we're going to get into the specifics. So there's a lot for us to talk about here. There's probably enough to fill 100 seasons of, everything related to this topic. I mean, you can go as deep as you want into it, which is part of why people like me get so addicted to it. But we're going to kind of break that down, right? So we're going to have dedicated seasons for each aspect of this. We will talk about fishing in all of them, obviously, as that's the main point. But we may have a full season of talking about what does hiking look like to these places and how do you find it. We may have a whole season dedicated to the apps and the software that you might want to use to be a more effective backcountry angler and a more effective woodsman. We may have a whole season about the equipment that we want to use just for backpacking or for anything else so that you can really think about that stuff. And really, ultimately, the goal is to build a library of information and knowledge, partially from me, but partially from a lot of really interesting guests who have been doing it longer than I have and who know a lot more about it than I do in some instances, that folks can use as a resource and that they can start pulling information from and saying, look, I don't really know where to go. I don't want to have to deal with synthesizing information from fishing websites and hiking websites and Reddit and all these forums and put it all together into something cohesive that may or may not work. We're just going to talk about it, and we're going to hopefully give you the information that you need to get out there and to get out there safely. And in the meantime, I hope we're going to have a lot of fun. If you've got stories to share with us, we'd love to hear those. I will certainly be telling stories as we go because I've got some really interesting and some pretty funny ones. And the goal is to remember that we are out there for, first and foremost, fun and for healing and for relaxation, right? We are not out fly fishing because it stresses us out or because we want to treat it like a full-time job, which it is not for me, for most other people. But we do it because we enjoy it. And we can do the same thing with the podcast. We can be serious and talk about serious issues. We can also have fun and laugh and have a good time and remember that at the end of the day, we're just here to talk about fishing, right? So I hope you enjoy that. I hope that sounds exciting to you. We are going to be kind of feeling our way through this for season 1. I'll update you a little bit more on what all will be included in this first season in the next episode. But for this introductory episode, I'm Ross. I'm glad to meet you. I am excited to be here and to be talking about these topics, and very excited about where we go from here. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you real soon. Until next time, this is Ross. Maybe I'll see you out there, but hopefully not.